Well, as I forecast, last Saturday was in many ways going to be almost the nadir of the Liberal Party. Votes lost, seats lost, and a potential leader gone in Josh Frydenberg. Terry Barnes writes regularly about health, social policy and politics, in particular for The Spectator Australia and Spectator UK. He has worked with federal and state governments and in politics for 25 years. He was a senior personal advisor to two federal health ministers, Michael Wooldridge and Tony Abbott. He was a senior public servant in several senior portfolios for 15 years and for several years oversaw the Commonwealth's funding responsibilities under the Australian healthcare agreements. His insights into the Liberal Party as to where it has been and where it's going are worth noting, and I thought we'd talk to him, and he joins me. Terry, thank you very much for your time. I mean, postmortems are beneficial, so answer your own question. How was Scott Morrison defeated?
Well, look, I think it was three things. One, the it's time factor. Two, I think the Labor Party successfully framed this campaign as a referendum, not on Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, but on Scott Morrison, the man, his character, his personality, his behaviour. But the third thing, I think, of course, was the fact that the Liberal Party itself found itself being squeezed very hard from both the left and the right. You know, we're talking about the Teal independents and their climate agenda and their certainly the professional women who have been behind it. But on the other side, I think there are a lot of disillusioned coalition, especially Liberal Party voters who jumped ship, who went with the so-called freedom parties or with other minor parties and independents because they were just sick to death of the coalition and the way that they felt that the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister had abandoned traditional Liberal principles and values. So all that was the perfect storm, some self-inflicted, some politics and some it's time, I think.
Yes, excellent point. You say he wasn't saved by his economic management or the unemployment rate of 3.9%, the lowest in 50 years, nor by the fact that the post-COVID economic bounce back was one of the biggest and quickest in the OECD. And you say he wasn't saved by the low COVID-related death rates or a double vaccination rate of nearly 95%. Do you think, therefore, that a lot of this started way back when Abbott was knifed?
Well, look, I think that September 14th, 2015 was the day that the Liberal Party started losing on Saturday night. I think it was the day they abandoned a leader in a way that the Labor Party had made the norm, which I think has reverberated right down the 7 years since. But the other side of it, I think, is that since the 2014 budget, particularly, the Liberal Party or the coalition government basically became much more a transactional, a pragmatic government, really not thinking about what it stood for, what its values were, but just dealing with issue by issue as they arose. And that includes COVID, that includes natural disasters like the bushfires and the floods. There is no real ideological or moral anchor to the government by its end. And I think voters saw through that, and not just on the left, but also on the right. And I think the Prime Minister himself, Mr Morrison, did not show, for all his personal faith and all his personal moral values, he didn't reflect that in the way that he governed. I mean, I think when it came to the crunch, and it was a comparison between Mr Morrison and Mr Albanese, for all his faults and the fact that he was a gaffe machine all through the campaign and probably the Liberals' best asset as far as that went, he actually came across as more likeable, more relatable, a decent bloke. And more to the point, I think, a person who you would invite into your lounge room in the debate. So whereas Scott Morrison, I think, basically only had one setting, and that was turning the volume up to 11 and shouting at voters. And voters, I think, after 9 years, and particularly after the last 3 years, did not want to be shouted at.
Yes, that also happened, I must say, in the concession speech on Saturday night, didn't it? I just felt he was shouting at us as if it was an election rally or a Pentecostal meeting.